Among the bright names that gleam in the golden weave of the Aesir and Vanir, one is softer, quieter, yet no less radiant, Gersemi, whose name means treasure, jewel, precious thing. She is remembered as the daughter of Freyja, lady of love and sorcery, and Óðr, the wanderer who drifts far over the world. From such a union sprang a being whose very name became a kenning upon the lips of skalds, for when they spoke of treasure, of gold, of gleaming adornments, they spoke also of Gersemi. Though the sagas speak little of her deeds, her presence was like a glow in the halls of the gods. She was the embodiment of her mother's beauty, yet with a gentler light. Where Freyja dazzled with the force of fire and desire, Gersemi shone like a polished gem, steady, enduring, unbreakable. In her, the essence of wealth was not greed nor hoarding, but value itself, the worth found in things cherished, in bonds held close, in love that gleamed brighter than gold. From birth she was surrounded by treasures, yet she herself was deemed the most precious. The Vanir spoke of her as a gift to the worlds, a sign that beauty could endure even in times of war and strife. The Aesir welcomed her presence in Asgard, for in her was no arrogance nor contention, only a quiet majesty. To gaze upon Gersemi was to be reminded of the earth's hidden riches, the veins of or beneath the mountains, the pearls sleeping in the sea, the rare blossoms that bloom in secret glades. Her name soon spread beyond the halls of the gods. Mortals, hearing whispers of her, began to call their own treasures by her name. Skalds, when crafting kennings, spoke of Gersemi's tears to mean shining gems, or the fire of Gersemi to mean gold glowing in torchlight. Thus, even where her form was unseen, her name lingered like a mark of splendor. In the telling of her lineage, she stood not alone. For she had a sister, Hnoss, whose name also meant jewel or precious thing. Together the two daughters of Freyja embodied the wealth of the Vanir, not in silver or coin, but in beauty, love, and worth. Yet Gersemi's name bore a special weight, for it carried the sense of something rare and lasting, a treasure not easily spent nor lost. So she stood among the gods, a quiet jewel, radiant yet unspoken, treasured not for conquest or cunning but for her very being. Though few tales of her deeds survive, her presence was enough to inspire poets, rulers, and lovers alike. For in Gersemi, the Norse saw not only the glitter of wealth, but the deeper truth, that which is most precious is not always loud or mighty, but enduring, rare, and cherished beyond measure. In the long halls of the gods, where golden meat horns clashed and warriors boasted of valor, there was one whose presence silenced quarrels and softened hearts. Gersemi, the treasure of Freyja, was honored among the Vanir not for battle lust or sorcery, but for the grace of her being. To look upon her was to feel the weight of beauty that carried no cruelty, only reverence. The Vanir called her their jewel, for she was more than flesh and bone, she was a living symbol of abundance. Her coming was seen as a blessing upon their people, proof that the fertile power of Freyja and the wandering fire of Óðr could shape more than passion, they could create something eternal. The corn ripened more richly in the fields where her name was spoken, and fishermen claimed their nets grew heavy when they prayed to her before casting them into the sea. The Aesir, too, gave her honor, for though they had taken the Vanir into their fellowship after war, there remained a quiet rivalry between the two tribes. Yet Gersemi's radiance bridged those divides. Where she walked, strife waned, and envy dulled. In her presence, Thor's booming laughter softened, Loki's tongue stilled its sharper edges, and Odin's gaze lingered with quiet thought. To the high gods she was not a warrior, not a sorceress, but a reminder of peace and prosperity, the very things they fought to protect yet seldom held in their grasp. But her name reached further still, for mortals, hearing of her, wove her into their lives. The chieftains of Midgard swore oaths upon her name, saying, "By Gersemi, I will guard this gift as a jewel." Women whispered prayers to her in the birthing bed, asking that their daughters might carry the same precious grace. Lovers carved her name into wood and stone, binding it with their own as if to ensure their union would endure like the treasures of the gods. The poets found in her a muse for their kennings. Gold became Gersemi's fire, jewels, the tears of Gersemi, fine halls, Gersemi's dwelling. In this way, though few deeds were spoken of her, she was woven into the very language of praise and poetry. Her essence became a measure of worth, her name a sign of what mortals held dear. So was she honored not only as a goddess, but as an ideal. In her were reflected the values of both gods and men, the yearning for what endures, the cherishing of what is rare, the reverence for what cannot be measured in silver's weight or gold's gleam. Gersemi was not counted among the great goddesses of war, fate, or magic, yet in her quiet splendor she was no less mighty. For she embodied the truth that all striving, all sacrifice, all treasure gained through sweat and battle. What was it for, if not to hold and protect the things most precious? Thus Gersemi, jewel of the Vanir, lived as a quiet flame in the memory of gods and men, her very name a treasure, her presence a blessing upon all who honored her. If Gersemi was the jewel that gleamed with steady light, her sister Hnoss was the gem of brightness and allure. Both daughters of Freyja and Óðr, they were called the treasures of the Vanir, and though their names were often spoken together, each carried her own radiance. Skalds, when they named jewels and ornaments, would use either sister's name, for both meant precious, priceless, rare. Yet among the gods, it was said their bond was even more treasured than their beauty. From childhood they were inseparable. Where Gersemi walked in quiet dignity, Hnoss danced with youthful joy. Gersemi's beauty was like the moon, soft, constant, enduring, while Hnoss was like the sun on the sea, dazzling, ever-changing. Together they balanced one another, for the one taught patience, the other delight. And so in the halls of Sessrúmnir, where Freyja received her chosen warriors, the sisters moved side by side, the pride of their mother and a wonder to the Æsir and Vanir alike. Their mother Freyja, wise in the ways of love and desire, taught them not only the adornments of beauty but also the weight of worth. A jewel, she told them, is not precious for its gleam alone, but for what it means to those who hold it. So too with you, my daughters, you are not only fair to the eye, but a sign to gods and mortals of what is truly worth cherishing. Thus they were treasures not to be hoarded, but to inspire, to kindle reverence, to remind all who beheld them that the most precious things are beyond price. Many stories tell of how the sisters were invoked by mortals. When a bride was adorned with golden bands and fine stones, her kin would bless her as fair as Gersemi, bright as Hnoss. When warriors returned from raid with jewels and silks, poets would say they bore the laughter of Hnoss, the stillness of Gersemi. In kennings, their names became one with treasure itself, yet always the sense of something living and holy clung to those words. For unlike gold or silver, the daughters of Freyja were not dead matter, but breathing symbols of beauty and worth. It is told, too, that when Óðr vanished into his wanderings, as he so often did, it was the sisters who soothed their mother's grief. Gersemi would sit beside Freyja, laying her hand upon her mother's heart, while Hnoss sang soft songs to ease her sorrow. In this way they became treasures not only of Asgard but of Freyja herself, jewels that comforted the goddess who wept for her absent husband. Though sagas of great deeds do not linger upon them, the sisters were remembered as embodiments of value itself, living treasures, whose bond as siblings made their radiance greater than either alone. And while Hnoss glittered brightly, it was Gersemi's lasting gleam that endured in memory, a reminder that treasure is not always to dazzle the eye, but to rest close to the heart. Upon the plain of Folkvang, where Freyja claimed half of the slain, there stood the hall of Sessrúmnir, vast and shining. It was said that its benches stretched wider than any mortal could count, and its rafters gleamed as though woven from gold and amber. Here the warriors chosen by Freyja feasted in honor and rest, not unlike those in Odin's Valhalla, yet with a different grace, for Sessrúmnir was not a hall of endless strife, but one of joy, of beauty, and of splendor. And in this hall moved Gersemi, the jewel of her mother, shining like a living ornament among the fallen. While Freyja presided with majesty, and the Valkyries bore mead horns to the heroes, it was Gersemi who gave the place its warmth. Skalds say that when the weary warriors entered after death, their eyes first fell upon her. In her presence, their burdens lifted, for she embodied all that they had fought to protect, the treasure of home, the beauty of their beloved, the worth of the life they had left behind. She welcomed them not with the thunder of horns nor the clang of shields, but with a quiet radiance. Her gaze was steady, her voice gentle, yet none could mistake her power. For though she was not a warrior, her presence reminded them of victory's purpose, that every battle, every sacrifice, was made not for destruction but for the treasures of life, kin, land, and love. Some tales tell that she adorned the hall itself. The golden light of the torches seemed brighter where she passed, jewels upon the warriors' arms gleamed more vividly, and the mead tasted sweeter. She was not the source of the hall's grandeur, but the one who revealed it, as if her very presence polished the world around her. Thus was she called the living treasure of Sessrúmnir, the jewel that outshone all adornments. At times she sat beside her mother on the high seat, listening as Freyja spoke with the heroes. Though she seldom gave counsel, when she did, her words carried weight, for they reminded even the boldest warrior of gentleness, of loyalty, of what lies beyond the clash of spears. A man who heeded her voice found himself not only brave in battle but steadfast in peace. In this way, Gersemi's role was not of might but of meaning. She was the reminder of what treasures endure beyond death, of what beauty the slain had carried in their hearts even as they fell. In Sessrúmnir she was not simply Freyja's daughter, but a guide to the warriors who found new life in the goddess's hall. And so the poets remembered her not for feats of arms, but for her presence among the honored dead, where she shone as bright as any gem upon the breast of the gods. To speak of Gersemi in this place was to speak of wealth beyond measure, not of coin or gold, but of worth that endures past the grave. Though the skalds did not preserve many sagas of Gersemi's deeds, her name endured like a jewel set in verse. For in the kennings, the rich metaphors of Norse poetry, she was never absent. When a poet spoke of gold, he would call it the fire of Gersemi. When he sang of jewels, he named them the tears of Gersemi. And when he praised a lord's generosity, he likened his gifts to the treasures of Gersemi. Thus her memory was woven into the very fabric of language, shining in every poem that spoke of wealth, beauty, or worth. This, too, was no accident. For in Gersemi the Norse saw not only the glitter of ornament, but the essence of what treasure means. To call gold Gersemi's fire was to say it burned with her brightness. To call jewels her tears was to suggest that even sorrow, in her, was precious. In this way, she became more than a goddess, she was an idea, a living image of what men and women valued most deeply. Among mortals, her name lingered in quiet blessings. Mothers whispered it over their daughters, hoping they would grow as treasured as the goddess herself. Lovers carved it into wood or stone, as though her presence would protect their union. Kings, when boasting of their riches, invoked her to make their wealth seem more radiant. Even when few remembered her stories, they remembered her name, and that was enough to keep her alive in memory. The poets of later ages, when Christianity swept across the north, did not wholly abandon her. Though they turned to new gods, the kennings remained, and in them Gersemi lived on. A Christian skald might praise Christ with words once meant for Freyja or her daughters, yet still he would call the treasures of heaven Gersemi's jewels, as if unable to erase the goddess from the tongue of poetry. Thus, even when belief faded, her essence endured, hidden in language like a gem buried in earth. In the sagas, she and her sister Hnoss were remembered together, two radiant daughters whose names became synonyms for treasure. But Gersemi's name carried a greater weight, for it spoke of permanence, of something to be cherished not for a moment, but for all time. And so her memory became not one of deeds, but of endurance, a lasting jewel in the crown of Norse myth. Though few tales of her life remain, she is not forgotten. For every time a poet sings of treasure, every time a jewel is likened to fire or tears, Gersemi is there, her name gleaming in the lines. She is proof that not all goddesses needed wars or wonders to be immortal. Some shone by being, by embodying what men and women held most dear. And thus Gersemi remains, a jewel of the Vanir, a treasure of the gods, a name that time itself could not tarnish.